Good evening. My name is Charles Parasino, and I will be moderating tonight's telephone town hall with Congressman John Larson. Thank you for joining our interactive Access Live event. This evening, Representative John Larson will be taking your questions live tonight to discuss the latest from Washington, D.C., and most importantly, ICE, after federal agents killed 2 American citizens in Minneapolis this month. As I mentioned, this is an interactive forum, and we would love to hear from you. We will be taking as many questions from participants as we possibly can live on this event. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your phone keypad at any time, and you will be placed in line to speak. The next time you hear your name, you will be live on the call and be able to ask your question directly. If you are joining us online, you can submit your question in the form below the live stream video. Congressman Larson will do his best to answer as many questions as he possibly can this evening. If Representative Larson is not able to address your question, please call 860-278-8888 and leave a message along with your phone number or email address. Staff will listen to your voicemail and get back to you with an answer to your question. Again, if you have any questions throughout the event, please press *3 on your keypad. And to sign up for Representative Larson's newsletter to receive updates and information about future events like tonight's telephone town hall, press *6 on your keypad. Now I will turn it over to Congressman John Larson.
Well, thank you, Charles, and thank everyone for joining us this evening. I increasingly think that between the events that we attend and especially having the opportunity to have people call in and bring them up to speed with what's going on is increasingly important as we go through this crisis that we're all a part of because of the current president of the United States. I know all of you are as not only astonished, but just disconcerted about the events that have unfolded in the past couple of weeks. And between the families of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy, our hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to them. They were 2 law-abiding American citizens simply trying to protect their neighbors from masked and armed agents. I want to make a special point here because I'm not sure that everybody understands just what ICE is. ICE was formed back in the early 2000s. So this is not an agency that's been around for a long time, but was set up primarily to address concerns after September the 11th. But just in this past year, since Trump has become president, ICE has gone from $9 billion in funding to $75 billion in funding. ICE, as it exists currently, is a larger army than a number of countries even have around the globe. But this isn't just an army. This is Trump's personal Secret Service and what he's done with them to perpetuate fear and division, and also to highlight his power and his abuse of power of the chief executive of the United States of America. Now, why do I say that? I say that because I think it's important that, and I think probably most of our listeners understand this already, that he is all about what so many people have called a narcissistic nihilist. And by that I mean someone who is totally caught up in his own ego and his own grasp of power and his desire to encompass and engage as much power as he can consume. Unfortunately, he has a willing Republican Congress who has cowered and not stood up to him. Now, I say that, but I also have to add that we've seen fissures, and we saw that most recently. You may recall back on December 17th, 4 Republicans in the House stood up to him and joined all the Democrats in blocking the elimination of health care tax credits, which would have impacted 20 million Americans. The Speaker didn't take that up for a vote as he should have on December 17th. They waited to see if Trump could turn around those 4 individuals. And so they didn't take up the vote until January the 7th. But on January the 7th, not only did the 4 Republicans stand firm, they were joined by 13 other Republicans who said, no, this is wrong, because they saw what was happening within their districts and how this impacted people. And even amidst all the Trump threats and hyperbole, they stood their ground on behalf of their constituents and the people they're sworn to serve. At the same time, and this is what I want everybody to understand, in the Senate, because you may recall over that weekend, Trump also invaded Venezuela. And the Senate took up the War Powers Act and specifically stipulated that the president must come back to Congress and not do this on his own, but must come back to Congress before troops are sent to Venezuela, or Greenland for that matter. But nonetheless, they said Venezuela at the time. And it was a sharp contrast and rebuttal to what the president had been calling for. And so I take that as a very hopeful sign that on 2 entirely different subject matters, but both related to the co-equal branches of government exerting their power and responsibility, that in the Senate and the House, they rebuffed Donald Trump on what he had done in terms of seeing 20 million people's prices double and ultimately 15 million people losing health care insurance, and in the Senate saying you cannot invade Venezuela without following the Constitution and coming before Congress, and specifically the War Powers Act that was enacted after Vietnam, to make sure that the president consults with Congress before he commits U.S. troops to action. So I was pleased at what Congress has done, and annoyed, as I'm sure as all of you were, to see that in the meantime, what we saw transpire is that we had a secretary who was out there saying that Alex and Preddy and Renee Nicole Good were domestic terrorists with no evidence or no investigation or anything, which is why I called for Kristi Noem's impeachment, because she has gone outside of the law and her authority. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and my former colleague, also published his own op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled "The Un-American Assault on Minnesota," where he reflected on the immigration enforcement across the state and said, that isn't effective law enforcement. It isn't following the rule of law. It's chaos. It's illegal. And as importantly, it's un-American. The president needs to adhere to the dismantling of ICE. And you would have thought that after the situation where Renee Nicole Good was murdered, there's no other way to describe it, that they would have backed off. And instead, what we saw in the case, and I'm sure all of you have seen the clips on TV, where in assisting a woman who was struck for taking photos, that he was wrestled to the ground, disarmed, and then shot, not once, but 10 times. He was murdered. We have obviously filed articles of impeachment against Kristi Noem, and I want to say that initially there were a few of us. Now there's over 150 Democrats who have signed on to that article, and I expect that that's only going to increase as people watch the film, see what's transpired, and understand the gravity of what's going on in front of us. Secretary Noem has led a lawless agency and transformed ICE into what amounts to President Trump's secret police force. She's allowed agents to make warrantless, and the emphasis here is on warrantless, arrests, and to interfere with peaceful protests, and defended the execution of American citizens, violating our First and Fourth Amendment rights and the public trust. She has even implemented policy blocking members of Congress from being able to visit ICE facilities to conduct oversight without 7 days' notice, in direct violation of federal law that the Republicans passed in 2024, allowing members to visit unannounced. This is simply an obstruction of Congress, something President Trump was impeached for in his first term. She has engaged in self-dealing using taxpayer dollars to fund a $200 million ad campaign for ICE agents recruitment, bypassing the bidding process to hand the contract to a company run by her close personal friend. She needs to answer for this, and that's why we've called for her impeachment. But reining in ICE does not end with replacing Kristi Noem. It's become clear to me that we need to replace this out-of-control agency entirely and bring back enforcement that is humane and follows the law and that is in line with the United States Constitution and the people of this country. Imagine that under Biden, ICE was funded with $9 billion, and under Trump, under the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, which is why we oppose it, $75 billion is what's in there. That is unconscionable, and we've all seen the results. And it's about ego. It's about him and his grasp of power and wanting his own personal army to send into states without consulting with local police, state police, governors, or mayors. This is outlandish and needs to be addressed. There are a couple of pieces of legislation that have been introduced by Seth Moulton and Jimmy Gomez to repeal the secret police slush fund and redirect ICE funding to make life more affordable into healthcare and into other areas where the American people will be better served. And I want to make it clear here that it's not like we don't need to have enforcement on our borders. We do. But we need humane enforcement. And we need enforcement that makes sense, that's not overly expensive, and that directly deals with the problem. I'm also the co-sponsor of the No Secret Police Act to prohibit agents from wearing masks and protecting sensitive locations act to bar immigration enforcement at schools, places of worship, and social service agencies. Right here in our own state of Newington and Southington, Connecticut, we saw armed masked agents descend on car washes last summer, snatch mothers from their children. Those are scenes we'd expect out of a regime like Russia or China, not here in the United States of America. I also am supporting the Department of Human Services use of Force Oversight Act to require agents to use only the force necessary to carry out arrests and ban abusive tactics like chokeholds that all of you, I'm sure, have witnessed on camera. I also want to make a point here that people's individual rights, being that of people that carry cameras, and imagine the citizens that were threatened outright to say that if you use a camera or take a photo, you're going to be placed on a terrorist list. They should be placed on a profiles and courage list, because that's what they're doing. They're doing the work of a democracy and citizens. And more importantly, the members of ICE should have cameras on them. The member of ICE should not have masks. The members of ICE should be identified. The members of ICE should make sure that they're coordinating with state and local officials when they come into an area. And most importantly, carrying out their duties in responsibility under the Constitution. But like Donald Trump, they feel that they're above the Constitution. There'll be a vote this week in the Senate, and I know that both Senator Blumenthal and Murphy are opposed to the efforts of funding ICE. And I think that that's, as I was proud to vote against that funding in the House of Representatives, we hope and are encouraged that the Senate will do the same thing over in that body. And I know that our two senators will, of course, do the right thing here. There is no reason why Minnesota should be shut out of investigations into the killing of their own citizens. And yet, here we see Donald Trump and ICE again trying to prevent any kind of investigations by the states. There should be a massive investigation into what's transpired and happened by a bipartisan group approved by the Congress to go after and find every details. I can recall how worked up our colleagues on the other side of the aisle were over Hillary Clinton's emails and Josh Biden's laptop. If they would only show their same concern about every American and everyone being fundamental rights being breached by what this personal army of Trump is doing all across this country. And when people think for a moment that it can't happen here, we know in Connecticut that's not true. It's already transpired. Thankfully, no one was murdered, but yet personal rights and mothers being torn from their children, that's not the America that any of you on this call or I know to be the country that we grew up in love. I know our senators will do the right thing this week, and I'm hoping that they defeat that measure. And one thing I can say is that I'm proud that I'm on Donald Trump's hit list. I'm proud that because I spoke up and out and stood up against ICE and against Elon Musk and against this administration, that they have placed me on this list with Hakeem Jeffries and Jasmine Crockett and other members of our caucus. And I will continue to stand up to this rogue administration and stand with you in this fight for liberty and justice for all. Now I want to hear from you and the questions that you have. I apologize. I've been talking a lot lately and just came from a rally earlier this afternoon at the state capitol. And again, thanking the citizens. And let me be clear about this. It's the citizens that are going to make the difference. It's people speaking out. It's people protesting. Yep, I'm your voice in Congress and will continue to speak out and represent you. But what other members of Congress and what moves people is when the people of the country they represent speak out everywhere across the country, as they have over these past several weeks, and as they did today in the snow-cold filled area at the state capitol. I commend those citizens who continue to speak out and assure you that I have your back and will keep fighting on your behalf. Now I'll turn it over to Charles so we can take your questions.
Thank you, Congressman. As a reminder to everyone on the line, if you have any questions throughout the event, please press *3 on your keypad to get in line to have your question asked live on the air. And to sign up for Representative Larson's newsletter to receive updates and information about future events, press *6 on your keypad. Now we will turn it over to our first question. We have Brian from West Hartford who is on the line, who has a question about impeaching Kristi Noem. Brian, you should be live with the Congressman.
I sure am. Thank you. And Congressman, thank you for taking the time to do this and to answer our questions. You did speak about the impeachment process and the number of signatures. I appreciate that. I also had a question about the funding, and I apologize because it's a little convoluted, but I read somewhere that there might be a vote coming up for some bills for some funding and that you guys might be able to block some of the funding for DHS. Can you give a little context on that and what might be involved in that, please?
Yes. Well, thank you, Brian, for the question. First and foremost, there was a vote last week in the House of Representatives, and I, along with just about all Democrats, voted against the Department of Homeland Security. That's called DHS, and that's where ICE is funded under. And as you may have heard me say, that's gone from $9 billion under the Biden administration to $75 billion under Trump. As I also said, there are more personal secret police for Trump in this than there are for armies of other nations around the world. Just to put it in perspective and why this was so outblown. It was passed in their big, beautiful bill, which of course we opposed, and then this was an appropriations bill that was voted on, the funding for the Department of Homeland Security. And to your point, this bill now goes to the Senate. And I assure you that both Senators Murphy and Blumenthal are leading the charge to block the funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Not that, again, this will be cast by the other side of saying we're against enforcement. No, we're not against enforcement. What we're against is what Trump has done to take this money and utilize it to create his own Secret Service army and utilize it to both divide the country and create fear, and to do it in a way that they're yanking mothers from their children, and as we've seen in the case that we've outlined earlier, brutally murder 2 American citizens. And so, yes, this will be a vote that comes up in the Senate either Thursday or Friday of this week. And why I implore you to call the Senate. Our senators are strongly behind this, but call the Senate and let people know on both sides of the aisle that you oppose this, because this is outlandish what they're actually doing. And the pressure is working. and it's the citizens that can make a difference. The reason 2 votes were overturned in January, I like to say it was because of the eloquence of a speech I gave or my interest or passion, but it was because of the citizens who spoke out all across the country, and even citizens from a state of Connecticut who speak to their friends and neighbors and relatives and people in other states, or who wire other elected officials other than their own representatives and saying, you must be aware of what this does and vote against it. It matters, and it counts. And so I thank you for your question, Brian, and that's what we're going to continue today.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question is an online question from Miriam, who joins us from West Hartford. And she asks, are ICE agents going to receive presidential pardons to shield them from accountability? What can be done to pursue charges against agents who break the law?
Well, Miriam, thank you. And I think that's on the mind of everyone. And when you're a person who believes you're above the law, as Trump does, I think your gut and your instincts is that what he has done is assure these individuals in ICE that he will protect them or he will pardon them. But ICE agents need to be held accountable to citizens just like our local law enforcement. ICE agents who violate the law and their oath and the Constitution have to be brought to justice. Otherwise, there is no law. This is another example of why ICE needs to be replaced with an interior immigration agency focused on enforcement, but humanitarian enforcement and accountability and cost effectiveness. And don't let this be misconstrued. People like to say that anyone who opposes ICE is not for enforcement. That is not the truth whatsoever. We know that there are people in this country illegally who have committed crimes, and yes, they deserve to be expelled. But this is totally going against this and totally going after innocent people without criminal records and just rounding up people mainly based on the color of their skin and not on whether or not they've been in violation of the law. That's not the America we know. That's not what the law of the land is all about. And that's why we have to make sure that we hold ICE agents accountable. It's hard, though, Miriam, not to agree with you, seeing what the president has said, that he is above the law. And let me assure you, he is not above the law. And when Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, we are going to hold him accountable. Impeachment proceedings are already in the process for Secretary Noem, and they will be in the process for President Trump as well. And he may believe that he's above the law, and he may try to convince these ICE agents, which becomes pretty apparent based on their actions that they believe they are, but that is not the case. We are still a nation of laws. We are formed under the Constitution. That's what we, the people, is all about. It's not we, the president. It's we, the people.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question comes from Deshaun, who is asking about Venezuela and Greenland. Deshaun, you are now live with the Congressman.
Hello, thank you very much for taking my call. And I'm concerned about Venezuela about us just going in. I mean, him just giving an order like he's a king to go in there and just direct our armies to take out a president of another country. And then now he's talking about doing Greenland, going to just take over Greenland, just marching in there. This is another country. I mean, are we in a new empire stage? I mean, what's going on?
Well, Deshaun, first and foremost, thank you for your questions. And let me say from the outset that what we don't need is another forever war. And I was pleased, as I said earlier, that the Senate took the action that it did in demanding that under the War Powers Act, and let me give a little background on this. First and foremost, number one, in the Constitution, the President has the responsibility to come before Congress. You may have heard the President say that, well, this wasn't a war. I was just carrying out a judicial action. I think everybody knows, based on the magnitude and the number of troops and everything that was employed. And let me say, first and foremost, what a remarkable job was done by our troops. But however remarkable, it was still without the consent of the United States Congress. And make no mistake, this was an act of war. And it should have come before Congress, which is why the Senate vote to say any further action that he does, again, evoking the War Powers Act, that he must come before the United States Congress to get approval. So I'm heartened by the fact that Republicans joined Democrats in exercising what is the responsibility of a co-equal branch of government to make sure that before we engage in war, there is the proper and appropriate review of all the facts and what matters, and the executive sharing with the legislative branch of government why they're calling for such an invasion. We introduced a bipartisan bill called the No Funds for NATO Invasion Act, which would prohibit the president from invading a NATO ally, like you indicated in the case of Greenland, which was, Iceland, which is one of our allies. And I am again heartened by the fact that we have two Republican co-sponsors, Don Bacon of Nebraska and Tom Massey of Kentucky. And we, and I hope all of you, keep demanding more of our Republican colleagues join with us to push this bill for a vote. We only need 3 Republicans to join with the entire Democratic caucus to pass this bill in the House. Just last week, Speaker Mike Johnson had to hold open a vote on Venezuela war powers so that he could fly in a Republican member from Texas to kill the bill. Had just one more Republican had the courage to stand up with us, we could have defeated that. My Republican colleagues must step up to safeguard our nation and the world before this rogue president blows up NATO because of his own vanity and ego.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question is an online submission from Joseph, who joins us from East Hartford. And he asks, as a 45-year local law enforcement officer, I know that the Department of Justice would prosecute any state or local police officers if they were in a similar situation to the ICE agent who killed Alex Preddy. What use of force policies can be put in place at ICE to stop this?
Well, Joseph, thank you first and foremost for your service to our community. And unfortunately, the use of force policy that was instituted under President Biden right now is only and let me put quotes around this, guidance, and has been totally dismissed by Secretary Noem and President Trump. That's why I'm leading a bill that calls for the Department of Human Services Use of Force Oversight Act with Congresswoman Ramirez that would reinstate and make the Biden-era use of force guidance law. This would limit actions to only those needed to carry out an arrest. We have seen that ICE is quick to escalate into deadly tactics, and that must end now. The current militarization of ICE is killing our citizens, and I can't underscore that enough. The militarization of ICE and Trump believing this is his own personal army that he can use to create fear and be disruptive. And can you imagine Secretary Noem saying that these two citizens were terrorists? They'll use any excuse to execute his grab for more power and extending the powers that the chief executive of the President of the United States already has. We're co-equal branches of government, and Congress has to stand up, and our Republican colleagues have got to find the courage to stand up to this rogue president, and they know it.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question comes from Martha, who joins us on the air tonight, and she has a question about how ICE is doing their arrests. Martha, you are now live with the Congressman.
Thank you, Congressman, for this question and for having these open forums. I have recently read, I work for an institution of higher education in Connecticut, and I read recently about the fact that, or a piece of information that ICE will no longer be required to have warrants to enter a private residence or a private area of a public building, and I am deeply concerned for the lives and education of our students in Connecticut. So I'd just like to know if that is true or if I can at least rest easy about that.
It is true, and your concerns are well placed. Last week, a brave whistleblower revealed that Secretary Noem issued an internal ICE memo that suggests agents no longer need a signed judicial warrant to enter a home. Let's be clear. If you are in the United States, no matter who you are entitled to the protections under the Constitution. That is the law of the land. This memo, along with this secretary, conflicts with decades of agency policy and is a direct affront to the Fourth Amendment and its protections against search and seizure. ICE keeping this policy a secret is probably all you need to know. Lawsuits are already being filed and have begun, but this is a reason we need to replace this lawless agency running rampant over our rights as well as replacing this current secretary. We need oversight and accountability, and we need to make sure they do not receive any funding until that is done. The Senate vote this Friday or Thursday is that important. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question comes from Lori, who submitted an online question from Bloomfield, and she asks, what can we do to stop ICE in our communities?
Well, thank you, Lori. Unfortunately, ICE is in our communities without notice or welcome. In Newington and Southington just this past summer, we saw what it looked like when masked armed agents came into our communities without even notifying local officials, not even notifying the governor or the state police or the local police or mayors in Newington and Southington. I remember the mayor of Newington, John Trister, had no idea that they were coming. I remember later talking with him, and he said, my own wife is an immigrant, and she feels scared in a town where her husband is the mayor to even go out. This is totally unacceptable, and why we've introduced legislation that will require ICE and all other federal agencies to work with the governor and local law enforcement. What an insult to our local law enforcement officials. And by the way, are any of them masked? Do any of them not identify themselves? Are any of them without body cameras to make sure they're recording what's going on? You all know the answer to that. And that's why under Donald Trump and under Secretary Noem, they have totally abandoned the rule of law and gone with this authoritarian approach. They got upset that I said they were operating like the SS. You tell me how they're different. And so we're going to continue to go after them and hold them accountable, as are, I think, a growing number of American citizens who, listen, everybody wants to see enforcement of people that are here illegally. And there are. And that's a problem and needs to be addressed. But it needs to be addressed in a manner that Americans are accustomed to, that follows the rule of law. That doesn't mean you still can't go after and get the bad guys. It just means you shouldn't be rounding up all the innocent people and doing the ungodly things that this agency has, including 2 citizens that have now been murdered. There's no other way to describe it. By ICE officials. And we all saw what happened in Newington and in Southington and in Hamden and in my own community of East Hartford. People being grabbed without verification, without the rule of law. That's not the country we all know and love and respect. What America needs is transparency and accountability. That's what we need to be for. Thanks for the question, Laura.
Thank you, Congressman. Our next question comes from Ryan, who joins us from Berlin online tonight. And he asks, who is protecting our borders if Border Patrol officers are on the streets with ICE in our cities?
Well, thank you, Ryan. Number one, that's a good point. Border Patrol should be at the border. Unfortunately, Republicans included a $75 billion slush fund for ICE in their so-called big beautiful bill this summer. So they have plenty of money to hire even more Border Patrol and ICE officers like you're seeing on the street. It turns out Republicans are fine kicking 15 million people off their health care to recruit more officers to terrorize our communities. I'm working with my colleagues to reinvest this money into programs that will actually serve the American people. The Healthcare Reinvestment Act would redirect ICE funding to extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits that 20 million Americans rely on to afford their health insurance, and also to make the Housing Affordable and Defend Democracy Act, which would invest dollars into affordable housing solutions, all of which would be money far better spent, in my humble opinion, as well as revitalizing our downtowns and main streets to convert vacant office spaces and commercial properties in cities like Hartford into new housing for people that's affordable. We'll continue to stand up to the Trump administration's blatant abuse of your tax dollars.
Thank you, Congressman. I want to remind everyone on the line that to sign up for Congressman Larson's newsletter to receive updates and information about future events like tonight's Teletown Hall, you can press *6 on your keypad. If you have any questions throughout the event, you can press *3 on your keypad as well. I'd also like to remind folks about some of the services that our office can provide by calling 860-278-8888 at any time. Our office can communicate with and request information from federal agencies to help you navigate government bureaucracy, such as the Social Security Administration, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Department of State, as well as tax returns as we approach filing season once again in 2026. Please also visit our website at larson.house.gov if you'd like more information about what the Congressman is doing, as well as the services that our office can provide. You can also follow our pages on Rep. John Larson, both on Facebook and Twitter, as well as Rep. John B. Larson on Instagram. And to sign up for our newsletter, you can press *6 on your keypad or visit larson.house.gov/subscribe. Now we will go to our next question from Hanif, who joins us live on the call tonight with a question about ICE's hiring practices. Hanif, you are now live with the Congressman.
Thank you for the town hall, Congressman. One question that I have, it's been reported and outed recently that several members of ICE that have been in Minnesota are convicted felons, and one is a convicted sex offender. How is a federal agency allowed to hire, that's supposed to be enforcing the law, allowed to hire convicted felons and convicted pedophiles?
Well, Hanif, you're spot on. And look, ICE has been supercharged by this administration. In just a few months, they've become the largest law enforcement agency in this country, more than doubling in size. Again, you see Trump's ego and his desire here and his exertion of power and control. There is just no way to do that without cutting corners are hiring standards. And that's, as you point out, what's happened with the hiring of convicted felons and pedophiles. One reporter was hiring after skipping nearly every required aspect of hiring, even the background checks. Again, which is why our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who control both houses have got to be for an extensive investigation and review. That's part of the responsibility of the Congress, to do oversight and review of what's transpired and how did this all happen right in front of our eyes. And rather than being subservient and doing whatever the president asks, it's about time they stood up for the Constitution and their responsibility as a co-equal branch of government to do oversight and review. Democrats will keep fighting for that because we know that's what needs to be done. It's just another reason we need to repeal this slush fund, and we will do that when we're in control and hold the line on their funding in the Senate this week. This vote in the Senate this week is vitally important, and I just feel grateful that we have two senators that will be protecting our interests and the Constitution.
Thank you, Congressman. We have time for just one more question tonight. And before I go to that question, I just want to remind folks that if we were not able to take you live tonight, you can leave a voicemail after the event by calling 860-278-8888. Our final question tonight comes from, he just left the call, but we have one more question from an online submission from Nora, who joins us in Newington, and she asks, what rights does one have when ICE shows up at their door?
Thank you, Nora, for your question. Anyone in the United States is under the protection of the Constitution. If ICE were to show up at your door, number one, you don't have to answer it. Number two, you have the right to ask them to show a signed judicial warrant, something they have consistently violated. You do not have to sign any documents without consulting an attorney. So without a signed warrant, and don't let them into your house and say that you are consulting your attorney. Throughout it all, you have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to ask, am I free to go? If they arrest you, you can ask, or hopefully you've called immediately, your attorney to represent you, or a public attorney to represent you. You are not required to share your immigration status, and despite all your protected rights, we are still witnessing abuses. Peaceful observers like Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good have been gunned down by federal agents, which is beyond appalling and should sicken every American, and hopefully we'll have the Senate do the right thing this week. But together, and thank you for your interest this evening, We must continue to stand up and speak out against these abuses and remind elected officials and federal agents that they swear an oath to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump or Kristi Noem. Thank everybody again for your calls. As always, they're thoughtful. They make an awful lot of sense. It's hard to make sense out of what's going on down in Washington, D.C. But in a democracy, it's vitally important that citizens stand up and speak out. As I said earlier in this conversation, it's because of people. Yeah, your elected officials are important, and you rely on them to represent you and speak out, and I assure you I will continue to do so. But what's more important is that you speak out and that you're heard, not only by me, but by all the delegation in all the 50 states, in all the 100 United States senators, and the 435 members of the House, all as a co-equal branch of government who have a responsibility to follow the Constitution and hold the president accountable. Our colleagues on the other side know that what he is doing is wrong. They just have to see that the American people are behind them and support them in their quest. Thanks for joining us tonight.